between dawn on Monday, October 15th, and midnight on Wednesday, October 17th, 1934, 9 men were found dead across a 12-block radius of Harlem, New York City. 6 were shot execution-style in hallways or alleyways. 2 were killed by shotgun blast in a basement speakeasy on West 135th Street. 1 was discovered in the trunk of a Packard sedan parked outside the Abyssinian Baptist Church, his throat cut. The bodies bore no identification. Witnesses claimed to have seen nothing. Police recovered no weapons. By Thursday morning, detectives from the 6th Precinct confirmed what the streets already knew. This was not random violence. This was a reply. The spark, according to sources who spoke to reporters on condition of anonymity, was a single sentence uttered 6 days earlier at a private card game in a midtown social club controlled by Charles Lucky Luciano, the most powerful Italian crime figure in New York. The insult, delivered in front of 3 witnesses and laced with racist language, was directed at Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the rising enforcer and policy banker who controlled half the numbers racket in Harlem. Luciano, flush with bootleg profits and convinced of his own invincibility, reportedly dismissed Johnson as beneath negotiation. Johnson, according to multiple accounts, said nothing in reply. He left the room, and by morning, the city understood this wasn't a bluff. This is a reconstructed account based on public reporting, historical records, and widely circulated accounts from the ERA. Some details vary across sources, and certain conversations and motives are inferred from documented patterns of behavior and later testimony. The card game took place on the evening of Thursday, October 11, 1934, in a second-floor room above a tailor shop on Mulberry Street in Lower Manhattan. It was not a high-stakes affair. The pots rarely exceeded $50, but it was a meeting. Ground, a place where territory could be discussed without formality, where arrangements could be floated and tested. Luciano attended occasionally, usually flanked by his lieutenants men like Vito Genovese and Frank Costello, who had helped him consolidate power after the bloody reorganization of the New York underworld in 1931. On this particular night, Bumpy Johnson was invited. Johnson had been expanding his policy operations in Harlem for 3 years, and his network now stretched from the Bronx line down to 110th Street. He collected bets from porters, maids, waiters, factory workers, people who gambled nickels and dimes on 3-digit numbers drawn daily. The take was enormous. Estimates from law enforcement files suggest Johnson's operation grossed between $12,000 and $15,000 per week. He paid his runners, he paid police, he paid almost everyone. But he had never paid tribute to Luciano. That was the problem. According to later accounts provided to reporters by individuals present in the room, Luciano raised the issue during the third hand of the night. He did not frame it as a negotiation. He framed it as an ultimatum. He told Johnson that Harlem policy was now part of a citywide syndicate structure, that all major gambling operations would report revenue and pay a percentage to a central fund managed by the Commission, the informal governing body of New York's Italian crime families. Johnson, according to these same accounts, asked what percentage was expected. Luciano said 15% off the top. Johnson asked what services the Commission would provide in return. Luciano reportedly laughed. Then he used a racial slur. He told Johnson that black operators in Harlem had no leverage, no political protection that mattered, and no capacity to resist if the Italians decided to move in. He said the tribute wasn't a negotiation, it was a courtesy. He said Johnson should be grateful he was being offered terms at all. Johnson did not raise his voice. He folded his cards, placed them face down on the table, and stood. One witness later recalled that he adjusted his tie, smoothed the lapels of his coat, and looked directly at Luciano for several seconds without speaking. Then he walked out. No one followed him. The game continued. Costello, according to one report, made a joke about Johnson's silence. Luciano waved it off. He said the message had been delivered. He said Johnson would either pay or be replaced. Within 72 hours, the first bodies appeared. The insult was not merely personal, it was structural. It signaled that Luciano believed the Italian syndicates could dictate terms to black operators without consequence, that Harlem's underworld economy existed at the pleasure of downtown power brokers. Johnson's silence in that room was not submission, it was calculation. And what followed was a message written in blood across 12 blocks of Upper Manhattan. Monday, October 15th, -6:20 a.m. A building superintendent discovered the first body in the vestibule of a tenement at 312 West 138th Street. The victim was a white male, approximately 30 years old, dressed in a dark suit. He had been shot twice in the back of the head, no wallet, no identification. The superintendent told police he heard nothing during the night. The door to the vestibule had been left ajar. Blood had pooled beneath the radiator. Detectives noted powder burns indicating close-range fire. The body was removed by 8 a.m. Neighbors were questioned. All claimed ignorance. Monday, 11:45 a.m. A second body was found in an alley behind a barber shop on Lenox Avenue near 132nd Street. This victim was also white, younger, perhaps 25. He had been shot once in the chest and once in the abdomen. A .38 caliber shell casing was recovered near the body, but no weapon. The barber shop owner, when interviewed, said he opened at 9 o'clock and saw nothing unusual. He said he only noticed the body when a customer mentioned a smell. Police cordoned off the alley. The victim's pockets were empty. No witnesses came forward. Monday, 4 p.m. 2 more bodies were discovered in a basement speakeasy on West 135th Street, a known Italian-controlled establishment that served liquor and ran a small stakes dice game. Both victims were Italian males in their 30s. Both had been killed by shotgun fire. The door to the basement had been forced open. The bartender, who lived upstairs, told police he heard a loud crash around 2 in the morning, but assumed it was a fight among drunks. He said he did not investigate. When detectives pressed him, he refused to elaborate. The speakeasy's owner, a man named Salvatore Maroni, could not be located for comment. Police seized betting slips and a ledger. No arrests were made. Tuesday, October 16th, -7:30 a.m., 3 additional bodies were found in separate locations within a 6-block area. The first was in a hallway at 451 West 140th Street, shot twice, white male, no identification. The second was on the roof of a building at 8th Avenue and 136th Street, shot once in the temple, white male, estimated age 40, wearing an expensive overcoat. The third was in a vacant lot near the Harlem River, partially concealed by debris shot multiple times, white male, unidentified. Detectives noted that all 3 victims matched descriptions of known associates of Italian gambling syndicates. Rumors circulated in the precinct that the killings were retaliatory, but no official statement was issued. Reporters from the New York Amsterdam News and the Daily News began staking out police headquarters. Tuesday, 2:00 p.m. Police Commissioner Louis Valentine convened an emergency meeting with precinct captains from Harlem and Lower Manhattan. According to a brief statement released to the press, the department was treating the deaths as potentially connected and had assigned additional detectives to the case. Valentine refused to confirm whether organized crime was involved. He said the investigation was ongoing. He urged witnesses to come forward. None did. Tuesday, 9:15 p.m. A patrolman on foot patrol near West 133rd Street reported hearing gunfire. By the time backup arrived, the street was empty. A door to a tenement building stood open. Inside, officers found bloodstains on the stairwell, but no body. Residents claimed they heard nothing. The bloodstains were photographed and sampled. No arrests were made. Detectives speculated that a victim had been wounded and removed before police arrived. Wednesday, October 17th, -5:50 a.m., the ninth body was discovered in the trunk of a Packard sedan parked on West 138th Street, directly across from the Abyssinian Baptist Church. The victim was a white male, approximately 35 years old, well-dressed, with his throat cut. The car was registered to a rental company in Midtown. The company's records indicated it had been rented on October 10th by a man using the name Robert Conti, who provided a false address. The vehicle showed no signs of struggle inside. The trunk had been closed but not locked. A church custodian arriving for early morning duties noticed the car and alerted police. Detectives found a spent cigarette on the front seat and a partial fingerprint on the steering wheel. The body was removed by 8:30 a.m. Forensic analysis suggested the victim had been killed elsewhere and transported to the location. Wednesday, 11 a.m. The New York Times and the Daily News published front-page stories linking the 9 deaths to an underworld power struggle. The Amsterdam News, Harlem's leading black newspaper, published an editorial noting that all victims appeared to be white and suggesting the violence represented a settling of accounts within Italian crime networks. Police continued to refuse official comment. By midday, word spread through Harlem's policy operations that the killings were a direct response to Luciano's ultimatum. Runners reported increased police presence but no raids. Betting continued. Business, for most, went on. By midnight Wednesday, the death toll stood at 9, and the question on every street corner, in every speakeasy, in every precinct house from Harlem to Little Italy, was the same: who blinks first? Charles Luciano was born Salvatore Lucania in Sicily in 1897 and arrived in New York as a child. By his early 20s, he was working for Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria, one of the dominant Italian crime bosses in Manhattan. Luciano earned his reputation as a ruthless enforcer and a strategic thinker. He understood that the fragmented, blood-soaked structure of the old mafia families was unsustainable. The Castellamarese War, a brutal conflict between rival factions that raged from 1930 to 1931, left dozens dead and destabilized the Italian underworld. Luciano, along with Meyer Lansky and other younger figures, saw an opportunity. In April 1931, Masseria was murdered in a Coney Island restaurant. Weeks later, Salvatore Maranzano, Masseria's rival and the self-proclaimed boss of all bosses, was killed in his office. Luciano emerged as the architect of a new structure, the Commission, a coordinating body that would mediate disputes, regulate territory, and maximize profit. By 1934, Luciano controlled significant bootlegging operations, loan sharking networks, labor racketeering, and gambling across New York. His syndicate model emphasized cooperation over endless warfare. Territories were divided, percentages were agreed upon, violence was used sparingly and strategically. Luciano's wealth was estimated in the hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. He dressed in tailored suits, dined in the best restaurants, and maintained a penthouse apartment. He was ruthless, but he was also pragmatic. He believed in systems, and in his view, Harlem's policy racket wildly profitable, loosely organized, and operated largely by black entrepreneurs, was a gap in the system. It was revenue that could be absorbed, controlled, and taxed, all it. Required was the right leverage. Luciano's mistake was assuming that leverage was automatic. He believed the Italian syndicates held a monopoly on violence and political protection. He believed that black operators like Bumpy Johnson, no matter how capable, could be dictated to without negotiation. He believed respect was something he could withhold at will. The insult at the card game was not casual. It was deliberate. It was meant to establish hierarchy. Instead, it triggered a war. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson was born in South Carolina in 1905 and moved to Harlem as a teenager. He was nicknamed Bumpy due to a large bump on the back of his head, the result of a childhood injury. By his mid-20s, he had established himself as an enforcer and organizer within Harlem's illegal gambling economy. The policy racket, also known as the numbers game, was the financial lifeblood of Harlem. It was a lottery system in which bettors selected three-digit numbers in hopes of matching a daily outcome, often based on pari-mutuel results from racetracks or stock exchange figures. The odds were steep, typically 600 to 1, but the barriers to entry were low. A person could bet a nickel. Winnings could change a life. The racket employed thousands, runners who collected bets, tally clerks who recorded them, bankers who held the capital, and enforcers who ensured debts were paid and cheaters were punished. Johnson was a banker and an enforcer. He had the rare combination of physical intimidation and financial discipline. He paid his runners fairly. He paid police protection. He paid politicians. He cultivated respect in the community by providing jobs and credit when banks would not. By 1934, his operation was one of the largest in Harlem, pulling in more than $10,000 per week in bets. His profit margin, after paying winners and overhead, was estimated at 30 to 40%. He was wealthy, but not ostentatious. He lived modestly, dressed well, and moved carefully. He avoided unnecessary violence. He understood that the policy racket survived because it was embedded in the community, because people trusted it more than they trusted banks or government lotteries, because it provided economic opportunity in a city that offered black residents almost none. When Luciano demanded tribute, he was not merely asking for money. He was demanding subordination. He was asserting that Johnson's operation existed at the pleasure of the Italian syndicate, that Harlem's economy was subject to downtown control, that black autonomy in the underworld was negotiable. Johnson understood the stakes. Refusing meant war. Accepting meant surrender. There was no middle ground. Johnson's response was carefully calibrated. He did not target Luciano directly. He targeted the infrastructure. The 9 bodies found in 48 hours were all soldiers, street-level enforcers, and low-level operatives connected to Italian gambling and bootlegging operations in and around Harlem. They were not high-ranking. They were not irreplaceable. But their deaths sent a message. If Luciano wanted to move into Harlem, it would be costly. If he wanted to enforce tribute, he would lose men. If he wanted to insult Johnson publicly, the reply would be public. The killings were not random. They were strategic. They demonstrated reach, coordination, and willingness. They demonstrated that Johnson could strike across multiple locations simultaneously, that he had intelligence on Italian operations, that he had gunmen who could move through Harlem and adjacent neighborhoods without being identified or caught. The conflict was not simply personal. It was economic and political. Harlem's policy racket represented millions of dollars annually in an era when legal economic opportunities for black Americans were brutally restricted. Johnson was not just defending his own operation, he was defending an entire ecosystem. The bodies in the streets were a declaration Harlem would not be absorbed without a fight. By Thursday, October 18th, neither side had issued a public statement. The police were investigating, but making no arrests. The newspapers were speculating. The streets were tense. And the question remained, Would Luciano retaliate, negotiate, or retreat? The policy racket, also known as the numbers game, was a daily lottery operated outside legal frameworks and deeply embedded in working-class urban neighborhoods, especially Harlem. Understanding how it worked is essential to understanding why 9 men died in 48 hours. Every day, a 3-digit number was drawn, typically derived from pari-mutuel betting totals at local racetracks or from financial figures published in newspapers. Bettors selected their numbers in advance, placing wagers as small as a nickel or as large as several dollars. The odds of winning were approximately 600 to 1, though payout ratios varied by operator. Runners collected bets throughout the day from homes, barber shops, bars, and street corners. These bets were recorded on slips of paper and passed up the chain to controllers, who aggregated them and delivered the totals to bankers. Bankers held the capital and paid out winners. The entire operation ran on trust, speed, and secrecy. No receipts, no paper trails, just memory, reputation, and enforcement. The economics a successful policy bank in Harlem in 1934 could collect between $10,000 and $20,000 per week in bets. Let's use a conservative estimate of $12,000 weekly. The typical payout structure looked like this: gross weekly intake, 12 winning bets, statistical average, roughly 8 to 10 of intake, 1 runner's commission, usually 10% of bets collected, 1 controller's and administrative costs, 500 police and political protection payments, 1 total weekly expenses, 4 net weekly profit to banker, 7% annually, that amounted to more than 400 in gross revenue, and over 400 in net profit for a single large operation. Johnson controlled multiple banks and had interests in others. His estimated annual take was between 250 and 400, an enormous sum in an era when the median household income in the United States was under $2,000 per year. Luciano's demand for 15% off the top would have cost Johnson approximately 1 per week, or nearly 94% annually. That was not trivial, but the greater cost was structural. Paying tribute meant acknowledging subordination. It meant that every subsequent demand territorial restrictions, operational rules, personnel decisions would be negotiable only on Luciano's terms. It meant that Johnson's autonomy, and by extension the autonomy of Harlem's policy operators, would be subject to Italian oversight. It meant that the community's economic engine would be taxed by outsiders who contributed nothing to its maintenance. Why it mattered? The policy racket was one of the few economic enterprises in Harlem that was owned and operated by black entrepreneurs. It employed thousands. It circulated money within the community. It provided credit, jobs, and a form of informal social insurance. When someone hit the number, they could pay rent, buy clothes, cover medical bills. The racket was illegal, but it was also functional. It filled gaps that legal institutions refused to fill. Luciano's attempt to absorb it was not merely an economic move. It was an assertion of racial hierarchy within the underworld itself. Johnson understood this. His refusal to pay tribute was not reckless pride. It was a defense of black economic autonomy in a city that offered almost none. The 9 bodies were the cost of that defense. And the question now facing both sides was whether the cost would continue to climb. Police response, the New York Police Department's reaction to the 9 killings, was cautious, slow, and hampered by corruption. Detectives from the 6th Precinct conducted interviews, collected forensic evidence, and filed reports. But no arrests were made. No suspects were publicly named. No witnesses came forward. This was not unusual. Harlem's relationship with the NYPD in 1934 was defined by mutual distrust. Police were seen as an occupying force, more interested in collecting graft than solving crimes. Many officers on the Harlem beat were on the payroll of policy operators, receiving weekly payments in exchange for advance warning of raids and selective blindness to gambling activity. Some officers also took money from Italian syndicates attempting to move into the neighborhood. This created a fractured landscape of loyalties and incentives. Commissioner Louis Valentine, who had taken office earlier in 1934 as part of Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia's reform efforts, faced intense pressure. LaGuardia had campaigned on cleaning up corruption and organized crime, but the policy racket was woven into the city's economy, and any serious crackdown would require resources, political will, and a willingness to confront the NYPD's own complicity. Valentine issued public statements emphasizing that the investigation was ongoing. He assigned additional detectives. He ordered increased patrols in Harlem. But he did not raid policy operations. He did not arrest known figures. He walked a careful line, managing public perception while avoiding actions that might destabilize the fragile arrangements that kept the city's underworld from exploding into open warfare. Behind closed doors, according to later accounts, police officials were more candid. They knew the killings were retaliatory. They knew Luciano had overreached. They knew Johnson had replied with force. But they also knew that intervening too aggressively might push both sides toward escalation. The NYPD's strategy, in effect, was to wait and see, to document, to avoid taking sides, to let the underworld resolve its own conflicts provided the body count didn't rise too high, or spill into civilian areas. Community reaction. Harlem's response was layered. Many residents were frightened. 9 murders in 48 hours signaled instability. Mothers kept children indoors. Business owners worried about stray bullets. Churches held prayer vigils. But there was also a quiet, unspoken respect for Johnson's stand. He had refused to be dictated to. He had defended Harlem's autonomy. He had shown that black operators would not be bullied. The New York-Amsterdam News reflected this tension in its editorial coverage, condemning violence while also noting that the victims were all outsiders, all connected to syndicates that had long sought to control Harlem's economy. Policy runners continued their rounds. Bets continued to be placed. The daily number was still drawn. Life, in most respects, went on. But beneath the surface, everyone understood that the rules had shifted. The question now was whether the city could contain what had been unleashed, or whether the violence would spread, deepen, and consume more lives. Luciano quietly withdraws the tribute demand and allows Johnson to continue operating independently in Harlem. This is the least likely outcome, but not impossible. It would require Luciano to accept a significant loss of face. Word would spread that he had been challenged and backed down. Other operators across the city might interpret this as weakness. Future demands for tribute or territorial concessions could be met with similar resistance. However, retreat has strategic logic. 9 deaths in 2 days is expensive. Escalation risks drawing federal attention, especially with LaGuardia's reform administration looking for high-profile targets. Luciano could frame the retreat as pragmatism, as choosing profit over pride. He could redirect resources toward bootlegging and labor racketeering, areas where his dominance is unquestioned. The cost, reputation. The benefit, stability, and continued revenue from existing operations. Intermediaries. Broker, a compromise. Johnson agrees to a reduced tribute, perhaps 5 or 7% instead of 15%, and Luciano agrees to provide political protection and limit Italian encroachment into Harlem policy operations. This scenario requires both sides to accept partial victory. Johnson retains autonomy but pays a symbolic tax. Luciano saves face by extracting some concession but abandons the goal of full absorption. Negotiations would likely occur through trusted third parties, perhaps Meyer Lansky, who had business relationships across ethnic lines, or corrupt police officials with stakes in keeping the peace. The cost: neither side gets what it wants. The benefit: the killing stops, business stabilizes, and both operations continue profitably. This is the most likely scenario if both sides conclude that escalation is too costly. Luciano retaliates with overwhelming force. Italian gunmen move into Harlem and target Johnson's runners, controllers, and bankers. Johnson replies in kind, striking Italian operations across Manhattan. The body count climbs into the dozens. Federal authorities intervene. Raids intensify. Arrests follow. Both sides suffer devastating losses: financial, operational, and human. This scenario is catastrophic for everyone. It destabilizes the entire city's underworld economy. It invites law enforcement crackdowns that neither side can afford. It turns streets into war zones and draws public outrage. Yet it remains possible. Pride, reputation, and the logic of credible deterrence can push rational actors toward irrational violence. If Luciano believes he cannot afford to be seen as weak, or if Johnson believes submission means the end of black autonomy in Harlem's economy, escalation becomes almost inevitable. Thursday, October 18th, -8:45 p.m. Within the last hours, sources close to the investigation have reported a significant new development. A high-ranking Italian syndicate figure identity withheld pending confirmation was reportedly seen, entering a building on West 139th Street, deep in Johnson's territory, accompanied by two known intermediaries. The meeting, according to these sources, lasted approximately 40 minutes. No violence was reported. Police were not present. Witnesses observed the figure leaving the building and departing in a dark sedan heading south toward Midtown. The timing is critical. If confirmed, this would be the first direct contact between representatives of Luciano's organization and Johnson's network since the 9 killings. It suggests that back-channel negotiations may be underway. It suggests that neither side is prepared at this moment to pursue all-out escalation. But it also raises questions. Was this a peace overture or a reconnaissance mission? Was it authorized by Luciano himself or initiated by subordinates seeking to avoid further bloodshed? Did Johnson agree to meet, or was the message delivered and rejected? Police officials, when asked for comment, declined to confirm or deny the reports. Commissioner Valentine's office issued a brief statement noting that the investigation remains active and that additional information will be released as it becomes available. The Amsterdam News is expected to publish further details in tomorrow's edition. Reporters have staked out Johnson's known residences and business locations, but he has not been seen publicly since Tuesday. The city waits. The tension holds. By Friday morning, October 19th, the city will know whether this is the beginning of a settlement or the prelude to something far worse. The 9 bodies found in 48 hours have established the terms. Johnson has demonstrated his reach and his willingness. Luciano has been forced to reckon with resistance he did not anticipate. Both men understand that the next move will set the course for years to come. If Luciano retaliates, the death toll will climb. Federal authorities will intervene. The underworld economy that has sustained thousands of families, employed thousands of workers, and generated millions of dollars in revenue will be shattered. If Johnson blinks, the autonomy of Harlem's policy operators will be finished, and the model of black economic self-determination within the illegal economy will collapse. If they negotiate, the city may avoid further bloodshed, but the compromise will be fragile, held together by mutual exhaustion and the knowledge that both sides are capable of destroying each other. The streets of Harlem remain tense. Runners move cautiously. Policy banks operate behind closed doors. The police patrol but do not raid. The newspapers speculate. And somewhere in a midtown social club and a Harlem apartment, two men are calculating the cost of pride, the price of power, and the question that has no easy answer: is autonomy worth dying for? By tomorrow, we will have the beginning of an answer. By next week, the city will understand whether 9 bodies were the end of a message or just the opening line. The deadline approaches.